Before we get started, I just want to ask a quick question, and I want you all to actually answer this in your head. Okay, just not nodding and moving on, etc. So here's the question: have you ever walked into IKEA for a shelf, just a shelf, okay, and walked out 2 hours later with a trolley full of things you didn't even know existed when you entered? Of course you have. Yes, thank you. We all have, right? That is not a weak willpower. That is not bad planning. That is IKEA understanding your brain better than you do. Okay. Now, they make you assemble the furniture yourself. They route you through every department in a specific sequence. They put the price in small monthly installments on the tag. They build a fake, cozy living room so you can picture yourself in it before you have paid for a single thing. Every moment of that store is engineered to move you from, I'm just, browsing to I need this in my life. Okay? So, this is where it gets interesting. Those exact same psychological mechanisms, the ones that moved you from the entrance to the checkout, have names. They are also documented and researched very well. They are reproducible. And marketers have been weaponizing these for decades. They organize their tricks into 3 layers. And we are going to go through them: how you perceive something, how you decide on something, and how you feel ownership over something. So it's a simple exercise of perception, decision, and ownership. All right. Now, this exactly is what we are going to, in fact, dig into more details. Here's the thing nobody in the leadership world is talking about, right? Because your team goes through these exact same 3 layers every single day at work. The question is, are you accidentally an IKEA, moving people without intention, or are you deliberately designing that journey for them? So, today we are going to bust 6 myths that are quietly costing you right now. And I'm going to show you exactly which layer of the shopping brain each myth lives in. So, you can use this tomorrow morning in a meeting, or of course on Monday in a meeting, not just for today, certainly not on the screen, or to take a screen print, etc. All right. So, I'm going to read 6 statements. Now, I want you all to answer yes or no in your head, or you can also type in the chat box. No, nobody can see your answers, but you can share them anonymously, or you can just make notes in your sheet somewhere in your phone, or take a print screen of this slide, right? So let me read them out. Okay, so I was a top performer, so leadership will come naturally to me. Okay. Second, the reason I'm not growing is politics, not me. I give feedback. My team just doesn't act on it. My team will respect me more if I have all the answers. I need to be more visible to get to the next level. Last but not the least, once I get the title, I will have the authority to actually lead. Now, if you said yes to even one, you are in the right place. If you said yes to three or more, cancel everything else you have planned for today. You need this, you certainly need this. And if you have said yes to all, you've unlocked the full leadership delusion bundle. There's no price, but there is a fix. Stay till the end for an amazing surprise. All right, so let's try and bust each myth one after the another. Let's start with the first one. Okay. So the first one is, I was a top performer. Leadership will come naturally to me. As you must have all guessed, this is how every high performer basically, gets promoted. She's our best engineer, he's our best engineer, and she'll make a great manager, or he will make a great manager. That sentence has ended more careers than any performance review ever has. Here is why. The skills that made you exceptional as an individual contributor, your precision, your depth, your ability to go, alone into a problem space and come out with an answer or a solution, those are the exact same skills that make you a controlling, bottlenecking, let me just fix this myself manager. So let's say you were a Formula One driver. You are now a driving instructor. You are in the same car, but the job is completely different. So, and if you drive like you're still racing, your student crashes. Okay. This is the framing effect. This is the framing effect, guys. It is, the most, one of the most common biases, one of the most potent biases used. So the way you have framed high performance as personal excellence, individual output, being the smartest in the room, that same frame doesn't upgrade automatically when your job title does. And how many of you saying yes? Okay, thanks, Shri. And the anchoring bias makes it worse. So here comes the second bias, the anchoring one. Your brain anchors your leadership identity to your ICP. That anchor quietly becomes the ceiling for your team because unconsciously you trust your own judgment more than theirs. You solve instead of coach, you answer instead of ask, you do instead of develop. Now, the science is very, very unambiguous. The same information presented in different frames produces completely different decisions and emotional responses. You framed contribution one way, for a decade or maybe more than that, depending on your experience. But changing that frame is not automatic. It is intentional work. Here's the reframe, right? So high performance in leadership is invisible. It is the meeting that went well because you just set it up right. The person who stepped up because you left space. The decision the team made confidently because the frame you gave them made it obvious. If you are the hero of every story about your team, you're not leading. You are just starring in it. And you're not letting your teams become the star. Okay. So the IKEA living room isn't impressive because of the furniture, right? Just try and understand the analogy. It is impressive. The IKEA story is impressive because someone designed the entire room around how you would feel standing in it. That is leadership, right? Now, before every team interaction, ask. This is a practical way of using this. Uh, Ask if I'm about to solve this or I am about to create the conditions for someone else to solve it. Your new benchmark is your team's growth rate, not your own output. Okay, how many of you really, really resonate with this right now? Thank you. Uh, Track the moments also, you held back, not just the moments you delivered, etc. So if you like journaling, do that. It is definitely going to be useful after certain number of weeks. This is not an overnight journey, guys. This takes time. So if you are here for a quick solution or quick summary of the biases and how it can help you in your leadership journey, this is the right time to leave the workshop. Please don't stay till the end. This is not going to be a one night stand. This requires marriage with commitment. Okay. Now, there's also dark side to this bias, right? The transition away from IC mode can overcorrect into abdication. Coaching doesn't mean never having answers, right? It means knowing which situations need your answer and which situations need your silence. Develop a filter, not just a habit of, stepping back. Because you've got to share answers, you've got to direct when needed. You just don't blindly, let your team fall into trouble while you are enjoying in the sideline, etc. So please be very, very mindful about the same. Okay. Now let's move to the second bias, and please park your questions for the end if you have any. Happy to answer them. Thank you. I see some questions, but yeah, I'll take them a little later towards the end. Okay. Here comes the second myth. I call it a glitch. The reason I am not growing is politics. How many of you said yes to this? Please just, remember why you said yes to this. No need to share your experiences here. But if you are like that manager, who says that, let me actually share it with some controversy. And I want you to hear it fully before you push back. Okay. Most of the time, but not always, but most of the time, right? When a smart, capable person isn't growing, it is actually not politics. It is perception. Politics exists, bias exists. I'm not dismissing either. But here's the hard question nobody asks in that conversation. If two equally capable people are in the room and one gets pulled up, what was the difference? Almost always it is contrast. One of them had shaped how they were perceived relative to the others before the decision was even made. This is the contrast effect in action. You are never evaluated in isolation. You are always evaluated next to someone else. And whoever controls that contrast controls the outcome. Okay. And the anchoring bias that we talked about earlier is working underneath it silently but very potently. First impression your stakeholders have of you, that becomes the anchor, and every subsequent data point gets filtered through it. If your anchor is solid contributor, every piece of brilliant work you do gets you know filed as solid contributor work, not because they are biased against you, but because that is how human cognition organizes information. The brain is lazy by design. It doesn't reevaluate, it confirms. Okay. A senior manager I once coached would open every sprint planning with, we are really stretched this quarter. So let's be realistic. Noble intention, right? But it is actually a disastrous anchor. I know many of you already have understood because you're nodding. Uh, so what happened was his team consistently delivered at 60% capacity because their mental model was scarcity. We changed just one thing. He started anchoring to his team's best quarter, not their average one. Delivery went up 40% in just 2 cycles. Same team, different anchor. So here is what the leaders who get pulled up do differently. They don't work harder in their lane. Now, please don't misunderstand me. They don't just work harder. They do work harder, right? But they also create moments of visible contrast in the right rooms at the right times. They anchor their reputation to their highest impact moments, not their average ones. They show up in the room before the promotion conversation, not after. All right. Now, so waiting to be noticed is the leadership equivalent of like assembling your IKEA furniture in a dark room and wondering why nobody can see it. Okay. What is your practical move? So, and this is something you can try right now, right? You can, or just think about it and maybe try it out next week. Identify one senior stakeholder in your entire stakeholder map. And I speak about stakeholder map in a different video. You can check that out later. So yeah, identify one senior stakeholder who doesn't yet have any anchor for your leadership. In the next 30 days, create one deliberate moment of visible impact in front of them. And not to impress them, right? But to give their brain something to anchor your name to. All right. So this is very, very sensitive topic. So I'm going to share something which is slightly, misunderstood, etc. So, managing upward can tip into performance over substance, right? So the goal is not to manufacture visibility, right? I hope you understand. It's to ensure genuine impact, and it also is to ensure that genuine impact reaches the right rooms. If you're doing great work and nobody sees it, the fix is strategic exposure. If you're doing average work and you're engineering visibility, that catches up fast. You cannot just keep on performing. It also will be, anchored accordingly. So be very, very careful about this. All right, let's move to our next myth. Many people say that, I give feedback to my team, but my team just doesn't act on it. Again, please try and, remember those situations that may have occurred in your career and, align with them. So let me tell you what actually happens in most feedback conversations, right? The leader says, hey, can we talk, right? Your last two presentations haven't been landing. I think you need to be more concise and more data driven. I have noticed a pattern over the past few months. What does the other person hear? He just hears threat, 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 threat. So, and the rest of the conversation, the leader thinks they are being helpful, but the person is in a state of low grade neurological panic. Nothing gets retained at all, and nothing changes after the discussion either. So, this is again the framing effect at its most expensive. What you say first doesn't just set the tone, it physically determines what the other person's brain does with everything that follows, right? So lead with a threat frame and the brain shuts down the parts that process growth. Lead with a capability frame, right? And you open exactly the parts that can take in new information and act on it. And there's another bias I'll throw in. It's called the contrast effect, right? Which we've already covered. But pertaining to this particular situation, the contrast effect is the silent accomplice here again, right? So if you've been consistently framing this person against their failures, right, or against better performing colleagues, that contrast is the lens they see themselves through in every meeting with you. It doesn't matter, how much you believe in them, if your framing just doesn't show it, right? Feedback that bounces isn't a problem with your team. It is a problem with your sequence. So you can say this instead, right? Think of uh, um, maybe just think of a piece of feedback you've given recently that didn't land, right? The person didn't change, didn't respond, or maybe got defensive, right? Uh, I know everybody has one in their head. So now just ask yourself, what was the very first sentence you said? Was it the gap or about their potential? Yeah, you can think about it. Okay, what did my manager tell me, or what did I tell as a manager to my team? Did they just start with a gap or my potential, right? And here is the sequence that actually works. It's a simple three-step process. And here it goes. So step one, you should basically name a specific genuine strength, not a compliment sandwich. Many people misunderstand this with that compliment sandwich framework, where you say a good thing and you try and sugarcoat the actual feedback with something very very fake. So this is not about that. You should find a real strength that is directly relevant to the feedback you are about to give. Don't manufacture it. Step two, name the gap as a distance, not as a deficiency. So, you can always elaborate clearly that you are at step A. I want to work with you so you can get at step B, right? You're not highlighting it as a deficiency. You're also not underplaying. So, you're not saying that you're not data driven enough or etc. etc. But you can always mention that the impact you're capable of isn't showing up yet in how you structure your data story, right? And the last step, please ask, don't tell. You can ask, what do you think is getting in the way, right? Because the solution they generate is the one they will actually implement. The one you hand them gets, politely nodded in all the meetings and also gets forgotten immediately after that. So, please remember that feedback is not a monologue. It is a renovation project. All right. Something like, you don't tell someone their house needs work and then just hand them a bill, right? You basically hand them the tools and ask which room they want to start with for the renovation, right? That's the analogy. Uh, there's also a dark side to this. This, as I mentioned earlier, don't use this as a compliment sandwich mechanism. Be very, very mindful. This is not about that. So, authenticity is the variable here. It's not the sequence. So, please follow authenticity and ensure that you're not abusing, this framework to generate some fake sugar coated feedback. Okay. Let's move on to fourth myth. This is one of my favorites. Okay. Many people say that my team will respect me more if I have all the answers, right? It has happened with me many a times. And, we as leaders, the way we grow, we always tend to, like fall back on our default identity of an individual contributor. And we always think that I should always have an answer. Whether I do it or not is different, but at least I should be able to give answers so that the team can, leverage my knowledge, my experience. Here we are in layer two. where the decisions are being made. Guys, we have crossed the layer one, which was about perception. We're now jumping into decision making. And this is where I get to say something that is genuinely delightfully backwards from everything you were taught about being smart. Okay. So the leaders your team trusts most are not the ones with the most answers. They are the ones who make the team feel capable of finding the answers. Okay? I know it feels uncomfortable or counterintuitive, especially if you were promoted precisely because you were the person in the room who always knew. So I know every time you answer a question your team could have answered, you're making a micro withdrawal from their confidence account. Do it enough times and they stop bringing you the real problems. They just bring you the safe ones. Here's the discipline, right? So next time someone brings you a problem, your first two sentences are, what have you already thought about that? And what would you do if I wasn't there? Then, and only then you add your perspective. And this is not withholding, you're certainly not withholding the information. You're not, um, like kind of misguiding people. You're not waiting for people to fail. This is not being unhelpful, right? But this is understanding that the goal is not a correct answer. The goal is a team that can generate correct answers without you, right? Um, Again, there's a dark side to this. There's a version of ask before you answer that becomes maddening when the person genuinely needs direction. So please be very, very mindful and thoughtful about it. Don't just blindly apply this framework everywhere. There are filters to be applied. So if the team is really stuck because they lack information or stuck because they lack confidence, then information gap needs answers. The confidence gaps also needs questions. So learn to read the difference, like please, and if you have any confusion or if you need any help, I'm just a message away, WhatsApp me or email me. Prashant, I'm in this situation. What do you think? Is this the right time to jump in or not, etc. So don't just blindly like follow the advice. Be a good judge of your situation. So let's jump into the next glitch. So once I get the title, I will have the authority to actually lead. This one is actually tricky because we have been, seeing leaders who actually become authoritative after they have been promoted, after they have been made the manager, right? Majority of the people actually wait for the title, for the promotion, and then start considering their team as subordinates. Uh, we are in the trenches here, guys. We are in the deepest layer now. It's called ownership. And this myth is the most expensive one on this list because of how long it keeps people waiting. Right? Here's the truth about titles, they open the door, right? They do not walk you through it. I have worked with directors who had no authority in the room. And I have watched senior engineers with no formal direct reports move an entire organization because of how they showed up. The title was not the variable at that point in time. Let me share an interesting bias, a cognitive bias here. It's called the endowment effect because it explains why authority feels so powerful once you have the title and why it still doesn't work the way you expected. Ownership isn't, like transferred by a job description. It is felt. When you make someone else feel like they own something real, that is where the change really happens. So in classic research, people, assign nearly twice the value to a coffee mug simply because it was theirs. You must have heard about this analogy, right? So the moment somebody, like something becomes mine, it becomes worth more. The leadership application is this, right? So when you hand someone real ownership, not like handle this, take care of this, but if you say that this is yours, fully yours, you give them complete autonomy, including how you structure it, when you flag risk, and how you define done. That is where you activate a completely different level of commitment. Right? Think about the leaders you have respected the most in your career. Please take 10 seconds and think about the leaders you have most respected, right? I'm going to guess that, they didn't wait to be given authority. They created it by doing three things consistently. First of the three is, they made decisions clearly, maybe not perfectly, but clearly, right? They didn't hedge every call with 10 caveats. They said, here is what we are doing, here is why we are doing, and here is what I am not sure about. That honesty about uncertainty is more authoritative than false confidence. Now, this happens, right, with leaders, meaning um, many a times leaders, unintentionally fall into a trap of finding many faults upfront where it is not required. If things are unambiguous, you are clear, then you can go ahead. But when things are absolutely ambiguous, where you are not clear, many times if it is 60-70% clear, one should always proceed without, like trying to dig further. Okay. Please try and learn this. It is something that comes only with practice. Second step, the successful leaders, what they do, they transferred ownership deliberately. What does that mean? They said this is yours, fully yours, right? As I mentioned earlier. Ownership without authority is cruelty. If you say you own this and then override every decision they make, you're not giving ownership. You're just, giving blame, honestly. Okay. Third one, you know, those leaders who you remember, or who you respect, they were probably consistent enough to be predictable. But their team knew, meaning you probably knew what they stood, against, or what they stood for. Not because they had values posted, but because their behavior in hard moments matched their behavior in easy ones. Okay. So the rule of three applies here perfectly. Not, like 10 leadership principles, not a 360-degree development plan with like 17 competencies and whatnot. Because I have seen them in many organizations. I have been a victim to them myself. And I have also, like used them to subject my team to it. So remember, three behaviors repeated until they become the reputation that walks into the room before you do. Right? So a title without authority is just a lanyard, like a badge without a door. Um, Very official looking, but gets you nowhere, right? These three behaviors are available to you today, right? So you already understand them, you nodded to them. So before any promotion, you can start using them. Don't wait for the title, etc. Right? Now, what can go wrong with this is, ownership without authority burns out your best people faster than any other leadership failure. Now, the psychological weight of ownership without the reward of autonomy is one of the primary drivers of high performer attrition. So you have to be really careful about this also. Now, if you just say that you own this and then review every decision, it is definitely not going to make anyone's life better, especially not yours, right? Because you are willing to take credit, but you're willing to just share blame, right? You're not sharing ownership. Define the decision rights explicitly. Don't be a loser, right? Now, so guys, we've gone through all the nine cognitive biases. We've gone through six myths and the three layers. And this, the particular diagram or picture says it all, right? So we have perception, decision, ownership. These are the three layers. What does an accidental leader do, right? An accidental leader basically solves problem directly, answers every question, and waits for the title to lead. Whereas an intentional leader, designs the environment, like asks before answering and leads via behavior and transfers total ownership, right? Um, Here's a quick dysfunction diagnostic. If you want to just check your own team dysfunction, you can leverage these examples. So if you see this symptom, right, the first one, you see that the team is delivering consistently below capacity, meaning they have a high potential, but they are still, under capacity or underutilizing their own capacity. It's an anchoring bias. Now, I shared an example. What happens when you are starting or you're anchoring with a wrong example? Then team feels uh, kind of demotivated, and they are already set at an anchor or at a layer which they're probably not going to cross. they're not going to reach their potential, which is a bad trait for you as a leader. Um, the third one here, right? If the team is feeling overwhelmed and they stop making decisions, right? It's probably a clear indication of too many choices, too many priorities, right? So this is another, common problem. In fact, a major problem with many enterprise organizations, also with some startups, where you have in priority. Everything is a priority. Oh, every meeting brings in a new priority, and the team, the leaders are all confused. Which one is really a top priority? It falls into your bucket to identify what really is priority, talk to the correct stakeholders. Like, that's what a paradox of choice really is. Don't confuse your team. Don't get yourself confused. Find out what really is important and act on it. Right? And the last one, right? Talented people feel stuck and disengaged. Now, it could be an endowment effect impact, right? Now, as we discussed in the last myth, you've probably told that you have delegated certain things and you're not going to micromanage, but are you really not micromanaging? Please, revisit your own behavior and diagnose, analyze, and take care of it. Do not fall into this trap. Here's a simple one-page, cheat sheet. So, how do we use the three layers and when? The first layer, perception. Before you communicate, just think: Am I framing this as a threat or a challenge? What anchor am I setting? Is it a scarcity thing or a possibility thing? Right? Meaning, always set an anchor such that it allows people to reach their high potential. Okay. Layer two, decision making. Before every meeting, basically, like some critical meetings, try and see if I have exactly three options prepared. But don't go with like 10 options, etc. Don't confuse people. If you are given multiple options, try and like confine them to three options. One which is really conservative, one which is recommended, and third which is ambitious, which is really bold. Okay? And also try and think, if you're asking, what do you think before giving an answer, right? And the last, one of the most critical spaces for a leader to be in, the ownership space. So this needs to be done before you're assigning work. So now, are you asking your team to handle it, or you're actually allowing them to own it, right? And uh, have you explicitly defined their decision rights and how to define them? Right. So RACI is a simple framework that allows you to do this clearly. I'll talk about that in a different video, and I'll link it beneath this. But this is very important. You should be identifying the roles, the responsibilities of major decisions, and allow people to own things and not just um, allow them to fall through cracks. All right. Now, um, all right, I think we've gone through three layers, six myths, nine biases, and one thing underneath all of it, which is the entire leadership OS that we just went through. What I would like to close with is this right now. If you try to think of all the six myths at once, or if you try to act on all of them at once, it is not going to help you or your team. And the reason is again simple, right? Because the paradox of choice works everywhere. It applies to you as well. So don't try and pick all the six myths or all the six, nine cognitive biases. Instead, pick one, just one. Right? Do not change everything. Right? Pick one myth, act on it in the next 48 hours or so. So potentially by Monday or Tuesday, you should have something actionable for you. At least identify what you can start working on, and of course, reach out if you need further help or if you need further guidance or further mentoring. I'm just a message away, or I'll also share a link on the chat for connecting with me if you would like to book a slot. If you would like to get into a deeper discussion about any of these myths or any other challenges that you may have uh, while dealing with your team, while leading yourself before you can lead your teams, or if you are entering into a transition phase where you are preparing about the leadership, but you're not sure whether what you're doing is right or not, please reach out if you need any help. Once again, thank you all for attending this workshop. I will now pause and let you all share if you have any questions.